awesome. We've got Dave O'Brien back. He was hugely successful when he came on the first time. That was 2018. It was a great run there of Steve Nikolovsky, Mark Kluwer, yourself, Gary Ficke, Belinda Ficke. It was good times there living in Australia. Mate, I was just saying to you, you clocked lockdown. You decided to extend the family during it. So you're saying it was only 15 days, but still.
Well, as I said to you, mate, it might have been a little bit over that, but new addition. We feel really blessed. We had a little baby boy.
Yeah.
His name is Harlan, and we actually decided to call him after my best friend, who he actually unfortunately passed away in New Zealand in the Waikato River. And he actually died about 2 months before I opened Fifth Element, and he was one of the biggest motivators for me in terms of, like, we were like best friends since we were about like 4 years old. So that really hit me pretty hard when he passed away, and I remember it's like his motivation and his words still ring in my ears today. He was such a big advocate for what I was about to do, and he really did say to me, like, as long as you're following your passion, like, everything is going to fall into place. And where I didn't necessarily receive that support from everyone, and that's fine. But for him, it was just that simple. If you just keep on, if this is what you're really passionate about, and you really believe in it, he goes, I've got no doubt it's going to be successful. And when he passed away, and sort of tragically sort of took his own life, unfortunately, it just hit me really hard. But it was just a huge motivator for me, Ryan. Just such a huge motivator for me, because I just didn't want anything like that to happen to anybody else. And I also wanted him to know that I really, like, everything that he said to me, and his belief in me was fully justified, and I wanted to make him proud. So his middle name was Harlan, and so we decided to honor Paul with calling our son after him, essentially. So there's a really significant story there for us as a family, and
mate,
so we feel pretty honored.
Yeah, that's a full circle, full life story right there. It's all packaged in one, and it, like, what a way to start. It hits you right there straight away. And but it's fascinating. You talk about someone beside you who believes in you and pushes you to go and follow your passion. With just the last podcast, we were talking about self-efficacy and moving away all those barriers that various aspects of society or interaction or media places on you. How powerful is it to have someone close to you that shows you love them back, to believe in you like that?
Yeah, it's like, as I said, it's like around that time when I was trying something that was very, very different. And look, I would say it in a nice way. There's a lot of people who didn't necessarily think it was going to be very successful in terms of the idea and the ideology, especially obviously with Fifth Element, in terms of what I wanted to create there. And the whole principle of, not having like a monotherapy and using all these different modalities to actually help with the healing process of people. And unfortunately, there's not necessarily a lot of people who believe that would be a successful formula. But he definitely was. I mean, obviously my partner, Bianca, and my parents. But he was just such a big believer in what I was creating. I wouldn't say he necessarily fully understood it, right? But he just believed, because it was such a passion for me. He had just no doubt that it was going to be successful. And as I said, like, he was just always positive, like always positive. He was a tennis coach, but it just meant a lot for someone for for someone to have just like unconditional faith in what you were doing. Do you know what I mean? So, like obviously, like there's this huge negative behind Paul passing away and losing him and so forth. But someone actually put it to me. They actually said that there's one way of looking at it in terms of the loss, but it's also looking at the time where he passed away, especially in terms of how pivotal it was in my journey and my what I was creating, is that potentially he had guided me through a huge proportion of my life. And then when he was when he moved on, that now he became like a guardian angel, and a real driver behind, like I have to say, like he's a huge driver behind why I really want to help people. Like he's a huge driver behind that. Without that, would I have had the same drive? Potentially not. Still, there's a decent drive there, but maybe not as much drive as I have today with having unfortunately going through that experience of losing Paul.
Over here in New Zealand, we've just had there's sort of a bunch of young guys around Hawke's Bay, where I'm based, that as the term they put, they froth on a surfing and motocross and skateboarding, and they put on events and create content and all that sort of stuff. They just had a dear friend a couple of weeks ago commit suicide, and then it was picked up by one of our radio DJs who did the same a couple of years back. Lost a friend, and it's been like you say, you never want that to happen to anybody else, and it's amazing to see the response of those people affected and the message and the drive to carry forward. What's like you said, that guardian angel thing, that thing on your shoulder to say what's with my headspace and what's with the people around me's headspace that I've got to be aware of. Where does that show up now, a few years on?
Yeah, I mean, like even what it's brought to the table for me, especially. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. I mean, like obviously men's health is just such a big thing now. Yeah. Okay. And you look at male suicide, I mean, it's increasing. Okay. It's, the statistics are quite alarming on that. I couldn't obviously comment about what the statistics are in New Zealand, but they're obviously quite alarming within Australia. Yeah. Okay. And with that, like, look, I know some of the things that we're getting men to do, which I agree with, and I'm saying that they're part of the solution. But you know me, Ryan, like I also don't believe in this monotherapy. Like I just don't. Yeah. Okay. And the problem is in the society, we just put too many eggs in one basket. And I think that's a fundamental flaw in the approach that we use in the healing process. Yeah. Is that we say, well, you know what? Well, men need to speak up, and they need to talk about things more. And I don't want the listeners to get me wrong, because I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that. Okay. But I'm saying there's more to it than that as well. Yeah. Okay. Because look, I could say, my grandfather, he fought in the Second World War. And there's one thing that I probably learned from my grandma, that Australian men have probably never talked about their problems from a very, very long time. Okay. And then male suicide wasn't such a big problem back in those days. Does that make sense? Now, once again, I'm not saying that men should not speak about their problems. Yeah, okay. They definitely should. Yeah. Okay. That is one of the tools that can be used to solve this problem. But the problem is, it's not the only tool. Okay. Like if I look at it from my perspective, what is one of the most alarming things with men is the severe drop in testosterone. It's crazy. Okay. Like I'm lucky enough, this, I look at blood markers on a frequent basis. Okay. And if you look at something like free testosterone levels, okay. So free testosterone levels is the testosterone you have available in your bloodstream. And if you look at the medical ranges, and once again, which is really based on averages, okay, so there's flaws in that measurement, yeah, okay, but free testosterone levels in the medical realms is anywhere from like 200 to 700, okay. Now, there may be some evidence back in, the earlier days that, free testosterone levels in men may have been in the realms of like 800, 900. So extremely high, maybe even around the aspects of like 1,000, okay. And a lot of the young men that I see, like their free testosterone levels are in the realms of about 200 to 250. Okay. And this is men in their, their late 20s. Okay. Even early 20s, early 30s. Yeah. Okay. And the problem that I have with this, okay, is that testosterone is what defines us as men. Okay. And obviously it's incredibly important for females as well. So I don't want to take away from that aspect. Okay. But it's what defines us as men. And also there's these poor images around testosterone as well, in terms of it makes us, aggressive and violent. Yeah. Okay. And what I'd say with testosterone, okay, testosterone for men, take away the superficial things that you're going to read in Wikipedia and all these types of things that, it might be, increased bone density, help with lean muscle mass. Okay. Now, I'm not taking away from these things because, of course, testosterone plays a pivotal role in these aspects in how we function. Okay. But let's just look at it. Let's just break it down. Like, testosterone is so important for men because it's actually in charge of our emotional health.
That's deep.
Okay, so it's going to actually stop us from getting things like depression. Yeah, okay, it helps with our ability to handle stress and cope with stress. Yeah, okay, these are key pivotal aspects, especially in modern society. Okay, and so there's if you can break it down, there's three fundamental things that affect testosterone. Okay, and I won't try and get too technical here. Okay, but one aspect is sleep and stress. Okay, so they basically say that one bad night's sleep could lower your testosterone levels by as much as 29%, like one bad night's sleep. Yeah, okay. So, and we see that, like I experience it. I see it in male clients. Okay, if they get a bad night's sleep, they're generally not waking up in the morning with a erection. Okay, they don't wake up in the morning with a boner. Yeah, okay, because your testosterone levels really peak about 3 hours upon waking. Okay, so you should really wake up. The analogy is like you should wake up with a tent pole. Okay,
morning
yeah, exactly. Okay, but if we're getting extremely poor night's sleep, sleep deficits, whatever, like sleep disruption you're getting, that's going to have such a negative effect on your testosterone levels. Okay, and then obviously stress, excessive production of catecholamines, stress hormones, cortisol. Okay, so this would be like the first area. Second area is zinc. Okay, like what they say that 49% of the world agricultural soils are deficient in zinc. It's huge. Okay, and that's why zinc is becoming such a big problem. But the added burden here is like the issues within the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, because if you have issues with like hydrochloric acid, stomach lining issues, so bacterial problems like H. pylori, Helicobacter overgrowth, okay, issues in the small intestine, so complications like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, intestinal permeability, then you have problems with zinc. Okay, and that's not even including the deficiencies in the world agricultural soils. Okay. And then the problem, with having the low levels of zinc is like zinc preserves the testosterone you have available because it stops testosterone getting converted into other things like DHT, which causes male pattern baldness. Okay, estradiol beta 17, which is like estrogen. Okay, so zinc actually helps to inhibit particular enzymes like aromatase. Okay, 5-alpha reductase. So it actually helps to preserve your testosterone levels. Okay, so that's another big factor. And then the other big factor is like xenoestrogens. Yeah, okay, chemicals. Yeah, okay, like because a lot of these synthetic chemicals and so forth, they mimic estrogen. Okay, now once again, if we've got a lot of food additives and food chemicals and all these types of things in our in our lifestyle, okay, that is not boding well for testosterone. So you start to add up all these things, which is what defines us as men. Okay, it's in charge of our emotional health. Okay, so once you start to add up all these things, and then a lot of the time we're looking at the free testosterone levels and someone's sitting at like 150, 200, and we're going, that's acceptable. Okay, and it's not. It's like, so why aren't we talking about this? So we're talking about the emotional state, and I think that's great, Ryan. Does that make sense? But why aren't we talking about the other aspects? Okay, because the only way we're really going to solve this problem is by addressing all of it.
Yeah.
Not just one aspect. Does that make sense?
Mate, that's making so much sense. And you're speaking there about an industrial agricultural system of monocrop sprayed with pesticides and things like that. And then you look back at, I don't know, have you seen Sacred Cow yet?
I haven't seen it yet, mate, but it's on my list. I don't need.
You
I'm
don't
a
need to.
convert, mate, so I don't need to be. I
No.
don't need to be converted, mate.
As I said when I posted that, I watched it. This is no good for my confirmation bias. This film, but
Yeah.
you know, deep dark red meat, and you know, Joe Rogan's always going on about how amazing he feels after eating wapiti for half the year, and it's like deep dark, high in carnitine, high in zinc. It's no surprise he feels so great. That and all the other things he adds to his body, but it is such an experience. And you know, if we're looking at soil health, that regenerative agriculture, regenerative grazing, you know, if you can take that a step further and get rid of the pesticides because you don't need them, that'd be bloody fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, and you know me, like, 'cause a big area for me is like obviously the failings in our digestive health. Yeah, okay, and that even one of my big arguments, and I think I've spoken to you about this before, is I'm saying that the severe issues with the digestive system and our poor microbiome ratios and the issues with the epithelium and the structure and so forth, because we've got this damage, and there's this link there with the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because we're not getting exposed to a lot of the microbes and so forth that actually essentially help with a lot of this fundamental internal structure. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And then also because we're not, you know, the soil is so deficient in a lot of these key micronutrients that we need for so many different functions, that's creating a lot of like complications as well. Does that make sense? And so when we start to experience like these digestive complications and these ratio issues and so forth, it starts to negatively affect how we interact with even healthy food. Does that make sense? And so the problem there is that now it's forcing us, like the issues within the digestive system are actually forcing us into these extreme nutritional outlines.
On
Like,
that,
and I always talk about this, Ryan, you know, and so this is the birth of, vegan, plant-based, yeah, okay, which I could use the argument is really the reason that you feel better on this type of nutritional outline. Now, I don't want people to, you know, have a go at me here. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Does that make sense? Is that if I've got issues with the stomach lining, and I've damaged the little different types of epithelium, like the parietal cells and chief cells and all these different types of, you know, epithelium within the stomach lining, and then that's also created like bacterial complications. The example would be like H. pylori, which is basically linked to things like GERD and acid reflux, heartburn, all these types of things, gastritis. Yeah, okay. Is that affects that nullifies the acidifying effects of hydrochloric acid. Okay. And then the role of the hydrochloric acid is obviously to help you separate B12 from protein, separate lipids from proteins, but obviously help you to take proteins and then break them fundamentally down into smaller chains of amino acids. Now, if I'm not producing sufficient amounts of hydrochloric acid, or it's being affected by something like H. pylori, what food group am I essentially going to be off put by the thought of eating? Well, animal proteins. Okay, so when you eat animal proteins, you get nausea, you maybe get gut distension. Okay, you know, it may cause things like belching, you know, protein synthesis issues, protein maldigestion, protein malabsorption. And so then we would say, oh, well, you know, look, I don't really feel that good when I'm eating that food. Okay. And then we try to call that intuition. Okay. But you understand, like, the issues within the gut lining and the bacterial issues are forcing you into a false sense of intuition. Does that make sense? It's just like, you know, I can use the argument on the other side, and, you know, carnivore, which I have, you know, I'm not anti, and there's definitely in certain instances, I think it benefits people, especially people with autoimmune diseases, okay, people with fermentation issues in the gut, especially like SIBO, okay, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Well, the rise of carnivore is coming as well. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, once again, if I've got fermentation issues in the gut, okay, which means I've got, you know, gut motility issues. So I've got problems with the epithelium. Yeah. Okay. And then I'm struggling to release certain types of enzymes, okay, to actually help me to break down glucose molecules and amino acids and so forth. You understand, it means the food comes in, okay, and then it will just sit there and ferment, okay? And then if it sits there and ferments, so you're affecting the transit time of the food, then obviously bacteria, okay, is going to follow where that indigestible matter is, or where that fermentation is taking place, okay? And then you get a higher proliferation of whether it's hydrogen producing bacterium or methanobacterium, so methane producing bacterium. So then you get a high proliferation of this bacterium in the wrong location of the digestive system. Does that make sense? And then people would go, well, when I eat, vegetable fibers and fruit fibers and carbohydrate molecules, I get a lot of gastrointestinal distress. And I go, okay, yeah, I understand that. But does that actually mean that you only really going to do better with food that doesn't sit there and ferment? For example, like animal fats and animal proteins. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So like my big argument that I'm trying to get across to people, Ryan, is like, at least get the baseline right. Okay. Like at least, correct the foundations. It would be like if you're going to build a house, okay, you're not going to go in and start putting up the walls and the roof first.
Mate, so where does one go to build a foundation? Like you think about elimination diet, and that's where I think you're in a privileged position compared to me in my optometry practice. And they, what are your comorbidities? What are your medications? And I'm just sitting there going, oh shit. Where do we begin? Whereas they're coming to you to begin. So where do we begin?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Look, it's a great question, and I think I can give you like a really good analogy. Yeah, okay. I might have used this analogy before, but I think it's a great analogy for people to understand. Yeah, okay, is like if you've got if you've got microbiome imbalances, okay, whatever that microbiome imbalance might be, okay, it can completely change how you interact even with healthy foods. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean those foods are bad. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I use one example, so if I had, for example, like negative gram-bacterial overgrowth. Now, I'm not going to go into the weeds of what that actually means. Okay. But if I had pathogenic strains of negative gram-bacteria and I've got an overgrowth of this in my digestive system. Okay. So the negative gram-bacteria feeds on prebiotics. Okay. And it feeds on things like starches. So certain types of negative gram-bacteria would like certain starches. So it'd be like things like sweet potato and potato, pumpkin, turnip, swede, rutabaga, these types of things. Okay. And then the fruit oligosaccharides, which are like fructans. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that would be things like onions and garlic and asparagus and wheat and barley and sugar and brown sugar and leeks, artichokes, asparagus and chicory root. Okay. So, what people need to understand here is like they're prebiotics. So they're just food for the microbiome. And they don't go down into your digestive system and call a board meeting, okay? And just go, well, look, I'm only here to feed the good stuff like the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus. I mean, if there's a higher proportion of the opportunistic bacteria, then they feed that. Does that make sense? Okay. So my point being is that if you have a high proportion of this opportunistic negative gram-bacteria, then that can actually dictate a lot of your food choices. Okay. And then with that can cause inflammatory reactions. They will release more bacterial byproducts, and then those bacterial byproducts start to cause more problems. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Okay. And so this is where I think we're sitting, Ryan. Okay. Where we're sitting, where it becomes all like what you said, like elimination. Okay. I react poorly to that. So I just get rid of that. Okay. All of a sudden I'm having problems with fructose maldigestion, fructose malabsorption. So I'll just start eating. Stop eating fruit. Does that make sense? All of a sudden I've got lactose intolerance. So I just won't eat anything that has lactose. Like what people need to understand is like, where are you going from here? Because your food window is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it gets to a point where you're just eating meat or you're just eating plant matter. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm not saying some people don't do better on that. I want to make that clear as well, because I do think some people just epigenetically, ancestrally just do better on those types of foods. Does that make sense? But also to understand, is your gut forcing you once again into an elimination where you're just getting rid of things, and then it'll get to the point where your food sensitivities change every 3 to 4 months. Okay. So it's actually built on food rotation. Yeah. Okay. And so if you're only eating a small handful of foods, at some point, guess what? Because you're eating them every single day, you're going to start to build up a sensitivity to those foods as well. Okay. And so what I say to people is like, if we're going to look at the foundations, what is the foundations of when it comes to gut health? Okay. And the foundations are the epithelium. And people are going to go, what the hell is epithelium? Okay. These are mucosal cells. Okay. So they're little microscopic cells that line areas of like the lungs, okay, the stomach lining, the small intestine, and the large intestine. And the way I would explain it to people, Ryan, is like the gastrointestinal lining and the epithelium and those little mucosal cells are the most protective physical barrier in the human body. Outright, okay? So the skin is a barrier. Does it make sense? Okay, so the skin is a barrier. I'm not taking away from that, okay? And it's collagen. It's connective tissue. It's not the biggest protective physical barrier in the human body. Okay, that is actually your epithelium. You know, a certain layer of your gut lining, it's called the mucosa. Okay, and within that, you've got the lamina propria, GALT, which is gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Okay, so this is all to do with your immune system because the gut is such a big player in your immune system. People need to understand that. Yeah, okay. And if I stretch that mucosa, if I stretch that gut-associated lymphoid tissue, that would stretch for 240 to 300 meters.
Unbelievable.
It is an incredible protective physical barrier. Does that make sense? And so where I'm going with this is surely we need to look after the integrity of that tissue because this is the thing, Ryan. It's just tissue.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. Okay. You know what I'd say to your listeners, it's not corrugated iron. It's not made of tin. Okay. It's just tissue. And so this is the question that I pose to people, Ryan. I go, okay, so let's look at other areas where we've got collagen, connective tissue. Okay. And so we've got 6 different types of collagen. Type 1 collagen is the most common. Yeah, okay. And so where we've got this tissue, okay, is in areas where, so we've got like tendons, ligaments, cartilage, bone, muscle. Okay. These are all areas where we've got type 1 collagen and we've got connective tissue. Okay. So guess what? Your gut lining and the epithelium, these little epithelium that I'm talking about, they're essentially mainly type 1 collagen. So it's made of the same stuff that makes up your tendons, your ligaments, your cartilage, your muscle, your bone. Okay. And it's essentially made up of this soup. Okay. And that's key amino acids like hydroxyproline, proline, glycine, arginine. Listeners, they're just amino acids. Okay. B6. So that's vitamin B6. Because you need B6 to assimilate those amino acids. Vitamin C helps you repair the collagen. Okay, manganese, copper, zinc. Zinc gives elasticity to tendons and ligaments. So for the epithelium, it helps with motility. So like intestinal churning. That's the soup that we need. Okay, and so these are the things that actually help with things like your muscle, your tendons, your ligaments. Okay, so the question that I always pose to people, Ryan, okay, I always say is, can you tear muscle? It's not a trick question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. You can tear muscle. Okay. Can you rupture tendons and ligaments?
You can definitely.
Yeah.
I know about it right now.
Okay. And can you deteriorate bone?
Yes.
Yes. Can you deteriorate your gut lining?
Of course.
It's just tissue. It's all it is. Okay. And the problem with that tissue area is that it gets bombarded more regularly. So people get, because everyone wants to know, what's the one thing that damaged my gut lining? I go, it's not one thing, it's an exacerbation of all of it. Okay. And so everything contributes. Yeah. And everything contributes to that load. So emotional trauma, childhood trauma, negative emotions, fear, anger, sadness, lack of forgiveness. Okay. Because you're raising like catecholamines, so stress hormones. Yeah. Okay. And you understand when you raise things like cortisol, that stimulates your lymphatic organs. So it stimulates things like white blood cells, but you also stimulate the production of things that are actually very protective in the gut lining because they're part of they're key players in antibody response or antigen response, like immune response. So you increase that when you're stressed. Does that make sense? Okay. Which means you're putting more burden on the ability to produce more of these things from the epithelium because they're produced in the epithelium. They're not produced in Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory's factory. Okay. They're produced within the epithelium. Does that make sense? and you don't have like an endless supply of these things. Okay. So yeah, so like these protective mechanisms, that's what people need to understand. So are actually produced, a lot of these things are produced within the actual epithelium, within those mucosal cells. Okay. And so that's one factor of emotional trauma and childhood trauma. Then you've got food additives, you've got food chemicals. Okay. Like the quality of water. So things like chlorine, okay, fluoride, all these types of things. Like I'm not picking on one thing. Okay. Now gliadin, which is the protein molecule that you find in gluten. Don't get me wrong, people. It's not the devil. Okay. But it's an exacerbator. Whether you're celiac, non-celiac, same response. Okay. And it stimulates zonulin and tells zonulin to open the tight junctions wider. Okay. And when you get gliadin and glyphosate together, which is like Roundup, okay, well, the glyphosate, okay, so the gliadin causes that and the glyphosate causes that, and that's hyperpermeability.
And for
So
those listening, Dave's got two hands together and he's making the fingers go apart and then the hands go apart. So you've got to channel three.
Correct. Yeah, okay. So, if I put my hands up again, okay, you've got one epithelium and you've got another epithelium. Okay, they should be nice and tight against each other most of the time, and that allows them to communicate. Okay, and what happens is the top section in between those like junctions, those intracellular tight junctions, which is between my two hands, okay, opens up. The top section opens up. Okay, there's another section, the gap junction, that gets damaged. And that causes that widening. And that's what we basically call hyperpermeability, or people would more commonly know it as leaky gut. I don't really love that terminology. Okay. But they're contributors. Does that make sense? They will exacerbate the damage in the gut lining. So herbicides and pesticides. Okay. Then your own immune system can damage your gut lining. So when you're producing too many pro-inflammatory white blood cells, like neutrophils, bacterial byproducts, like LPS, acetaldehyde. Okay, lifestyle factors, so alcohol, okay, cigarette smoke, okay, and I can just keep on going. More food sensitivities, food intolerances, anaphylactic reactions. So once you start adding up all these things, okay, that's a huge toll on those little epithelium.
Mate, obviously with keeping with your hands in the gut, you have your fingers up to simulate the villi, and you spoke about motility there before. What is it that actually knocks those fingers down? So then you don't even have the top layer.
Yeah. So look, one big factor, because obviously once again, there's many contributing factors to this. Okay. But if you look at like the brush borders, okay, so it's a little bit like the sea anemone. You've got the tentacles at the top, and then you've got the epithelium, you've got the brush borders at the top. Yeah. Okay. A big thing that actually causes like a blunting of the brush borders is actually just inflammation. Okay. Now, I don't want to demonize inflammation here, okay, because inflammation is a perfectly normal response in the human body. Does that make sense? Okay. And it's just your body's response to a particular stimuli.
Yeah.
Okay. Because like, once again, training causes inflammation, and that inflammatory response is actually a good thing, because then we produce anti-inflammatory mediators to combat that pro-inflammatory activity and then promote repair and recovery. Okay. And healing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. But when you've got too much pro-inflammatory activity and there's too many pro-inflammatory proteins and mediators that are getting produced, they will actually blunten the brush borders at the top of the epithelium. And then the problem there, Ryan, is that affects your ability to release, certain enzymes to enable you to break down, so, that's where you produce things like lactase to help you break down lactose. Okay. Sucrase to help you break down sucrose, maltase to help you to break down maltose. Okay, certain enzymes like dipeptidase, aminopeptidase to help you to break down, chains of amino acids. It's a key fundamental relationship. Does that make sense? Now, if I've affected blunted those brush borders, okay, is that going to affect my ability to release those enzymes to help me to break down those, particular molecules? Does that make sense? Okay, and so then those molecules come in and they sit there and they ferment, and once again they can encourage other issues like bacterial issues. Does that make sense? And so what I'm saying is like these epithelium, okay, and this connective tissue, its structure, the way to look at it is it's the key fundamental aspect that actually holds the environment together. Okay, so you've heard me say this analogy, I'm sure, but I say that if we've got a forest, it's an ecosystem, yeah? And this is an ecosystem. Like what people need to understand, Ryan, this in here, that's an ecosystem. And what we're doing, just like we're probably doing to the ecosystem in terms of our environment, okay, and forests and the ocean and all that type of stuff. There's a similar thing happening to the ecosystem internal, okay, because we're made up of 100 trillion bacteria, okay, and the way to look at it, those little epithelium that I'm talking about, if I've got a forest, okay, and you've got the trees and you've got the bushes and you've got the grass and you've got the soil, and then you've got the animals that live in the canopy, okay, they live in the trees, they live in the bushes, you've got the microbes that live in the grass and the soil, and that's the ecosystem, okay? Well, the way to look at it is the epithelium are like the trees. They're the trees and the bushes, okay? And so the microbiome need their structure, okay, because remember, 85% of our bacteria is good and about 15% is bad. Okay. And so they need good structure to enable them to proliferate. Okay. And to keep the right ratios. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if I go through that forest and just bulldoze all the trees down.
Or
okay,
while you're on the ecology metaphor here, or you've got a dominant species.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. And that's what you would create when you start to fool around with the environment. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And so if I go through and I just bulldoze all the bushes and the trees down, okay, is that going to start to change the ecosystem? Of course. Okay. Now, how are the animals that flourish in the canopy and the bushes and the trees, how are they going to go? They're going to give it a try. Animals, just like in the environment, they give it a try. They're just not going to proliferate. It's just not going to be the best environment for them. Okay. But what about the animals, okay, that live in the grass and the soil? Have they got an environment where they can still proliferate? And the argument would be they've probably got an environment where they can proliferate more now because they don't really have anything like picking them off. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And so how we've addressed this problem with the ecosystem is one scenario, okay, I've got this environmental issue. Let's just use a nuclear bomb. Okay. So we're just going to blow up everything. Okay. In the process, causing more collateral damage to the vegetation that was going to come through. Yeah. Okay. Like the bushes and we just get rid of all of that. Yeah. Okay. Now we may get rid of the animals that live in the grass and the soil and what I would say is the opportunistic bacteria in the environment of the gut lining. Yeah. Okay. You may get rid of that, but you're also going to get rid of everything else. Okay. And so you're not going to positively impact this ecosystem issue. Okay. Then we could actually look at even like a functional medicine approach. And the functional medicine approach is we'll use a slightly healthier nuclear bomb. Okay. So we'll use certain types of antimicrobials. Okay. So maybe a slightly healthier nuclear bomb, which means there's less collateral damage. But once again, we're just going in there. We're trying to get rid of the opportunistic bacteria that has proliferated because of the environment is perfect for them. Does that make sense? Okay. And then after we've done that, after we've got rid of them, let's just put more of the animals that live in the canopy and the bushes, even though they don't actually have a good environment to flourish. Okay. And so what's going to happen is they're going to give it a go. Okay. And they may do all right for a very, very short period of time, but it's going to be short-lived. Okay. Because they just don't have an environment that they can flourish in. Okay. Where when I look at this problem, plant more trees. Okay. And basically that means look after the epithelium, look after the tissue. Okay. Because when that fundamentally falls down, it's like a deck of cards, Ryan. It's just like a deck of cards. It's going to affect blood sugar management. It's going to affect neurotransmitters. So it's going to affect your brain. 30 neurotransmitters are produced within the enteric nervous system. So you want to know why your brain is breaking down? There's a good chance it's because your gut is breaking down. Okay. It's going to affect your hormonal balance. Yeah, okay. And so with that, if I give your listeners where you're going to start, well, what's the foundations that I need for that epithelium? Okay. And that's key amino acids that ultimately you're going to get from things like slow cooked meats, bone broths, bone marrow. Okay. Because they've got the glycine, they've got the proline, They've got the hydroxyproline. They've got the compounds that I need to heal that tissue. Okay. So you understand, like where I'm going to go straight to is just go, well, let's start to improve the structure. Yeah. Okay. Using things like, goat's colostrum. Okay. We can use certain supplements, maybe like L-glutamine. Once again, that depends on the individual. I don't want everyone to go out and just start mega dosaging L-glutamine. Okay. But, once again, it's just like giving the gut line and giving that tissue all the building blocks that it requires to heal. Do you know what I mean? And like a lot of people who are experiencing a lot of connective tissue issues, they've got tendon issues that never get better. They've got RSI. Okay. They've got little niggles that never go away. I'm telling you, like, there's a good chance if you've been seeing like, a physio or chiro, and I'm not taking away from these people. I mean, it's a really important job. Okay. But if you've been seeing these people for a long period of time, you've been doing certain exercises to try and correct some sort of biomechanical issue. Okay. And that's not getting better. There's a good chance it's not a biomechanical issue. It's a biochemical issue. Okay. And once again, they've done the testing. They know people with IBD issues, which is growing all the time. So irritable bowel disease. Okay. So Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and, diverticulitis and these types of problems, and IBS issues like irritable bowel syndrome, which really 70% of all IBS symptoms are really things like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So if you have these types of issues, okay, they actually did the testing and they actually found that these people with IBD, IBS, they produced up to 20% less collagen. They're producing up to 20% less collagen. How's it going to show up, Ryan? It's going to show up with like, cartilage issues and bone issues and tendon issues and so forth, because they're not essentially absorbing enough of the key building blocks that they need to repair the damage.
Yeah, mate. I've just had, again, talking about confirmation bias, huge validation for my choice to be gluten-free and have my daughter be gluten-free. I knew that I'm gluten intolerant. I've had a integrative practitioner sort of suggest that as well. And my 83-year-old grandmother has just been diagnosed as celiac. And I was on the phone to her saying, how's your blood pressure going? She's had a history of raging 240 blood pressure. Also things like polymyalgia, which is also on my grandfather's side as well. We've got thick Irish heritage. So again, tapping into what I hear from Dr. Libby, that celiac gene is rife in Irish heritage, Celtic heritage, in fact. And I said to her, how's your blood pressure? And she said, they're looking at taking me off my medications. I was like, how about that? How about that?
Yeah.
Inflammation and fluid and just like, whew.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, and you know me, Ryan, like, I don't want to make it out like, that gluten is like the devil. Do you know what I mean? Because like a lot of the time, like a lot of the time, the problem with like common wheat, is that it's genetically modified. Okay. So it has high concentrations of the gliadin molecule. So for the listeners to understand that you've got gluten, and within there, you've got these two protein molecules. One is glutenin and one is gliadin. And a lot of people have a negative reaction to gliadin. Okay. And once again, where you're celiac, non-celiac, same reaction. I'm not saying that's a bad reaction, but I'm saying it is a reaction that opens up those intracellular tight junctions that I'm talking about in between those epithelium. Okay. But once again, once you get it with these sort of, common wheat that also has herbicides and pesticides and things like glyphosate, it's the combination together that becomes a huge problem here. Okay. Because the gliadin and the glyphosate together are like terrible twins. They're causing havoc. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that's what's causing the hyperpermeability. Okay. And it's just the fact that they put a higher gliadin concentration because you understand gliadin is binding. Okay. And they want the bread to be more sticky and binding so they can hold their sausage in their bread. And it's not like crumbly, like a lot of, the ancient sort of fermented, breads and so forth that come from more of the ancient grains, like, things like rye and triticum durum wheat, which is a type of durum wheat, more commonly known as semolina, spelt, all these types of things. Because I want to make it clear, like once you get the gut environment to a good place, okay, because they've got lower concentrations of gliadin, it's not going to cause this exacerbation or exacerbate this complication within the gastrointestinal lining. Because it's just like, the way I would explain it, Ryan, is just an exacerbator. Does that make sense? So it's just making things worse, but it's not the sole culprit. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, it's good. And, you know, you're speaking about mucus. No, mucus linings and epitheliums, you know, as someone that looks at that all day, and it's funny you're bringing out the question, you know, what was the thing that caused my gut issue? And I get the same question. What was the thing that caused my blepharitis, my Demodex overgrowth or overpopulation, my pinguiculars on my cornea? You know, you get one set of farmers come in with pristine flat white conjunctivitis, and you get some orchardists come in and they've got these massive lumps in the corners of their eyes or surfers, you know, and you're like, well, what's the difference there? The farmer hasn't been wearing any sunglasses. You just don't know. But, you know, and then same with macular degeneration or cataract as well, you know, back to that collagen stuff. There's some type 2 there in the eye. But, you know, you go, life exposure, you know, the biggest risk factor is time. You know, it's old age. Yep. No, it's time. It's time under exposure to all this life.
Yeah. And it's just the accumulation of all these things together.
That's right.
And that's why ultimately, you know, when people ask me my approach to healing these things, it involves, like, anyone who's experienced my protocols, they involve a lot. And because I can't fix the gut lining with just like one thing, especially when there's been an exacerbation of so many things that have created this problem. Okay. And it's going to involve, like, if you really want to heal, you really want to get better, then it's going to involve you looking at all these different aspects to get you to where you really want to be, where you want to be symptom free. And because once again, you know, you look at the whole thing with symptoms, okay, we're just constantly trying to treat symptoms.
Yep.
Okay. We're just constantly trying to treat symptoms. But what people need to understand is those symptoms are just they're just a result of a bigger problem. And if you want to get rid of all the symptoms, you have to address the big problem here. Okay. And that's, you know, that's definitely what I'm trying to teach people, Ryan, is like, okay, this is the symptom, this is how it's displayed, but this is the actual issue. Okay. If you want to stop taking things like, you know, aspirin and Panadol and NSAIDs, and so ibuprofen and, you know, anti-anxiety medication like Xanax and all these types of things, okay, you have to address the bigger problem that is actually causing these symptoms.
Yeah. And it is the paradigm of modern medicine, you know. Myopia, so short-sightedness, is on the increase, or reading difficulties is on the increase. And I get every parent under the sun say to me, is it the screen? And I internally sometimes want to shout, well, you gave them the screen. But it's like, no, the screen is just another near task, you know, but it's the complete thing. It's the environment. It's the lack of connection. It's the reason they're on the screen. It's the fact that they're not outside. It's the food that they're eating. It's the oh, it's the blue light. No, well, when are they on this? Are they on it during the day? Well, that's less harmful, but shouldn't they be outside? You know, it's just like, how far do you want to unravel this whole thing? And are you serious, or do you just want something to blame?
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I just say to people, it's just like, how badly do you want to get better?
Which is sad, isn't it? Like, why do we have to be so hurt to get better?
Yeah. I mean, look, like, I've been there. Like, unfortunately, I had to, you know, push my body to the brink. And I've spoken about that with you, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
But I did that. I had to push my body to the brink for me to, you know, and it was one of the most enlightening moments in my life. Like, the one thing I'd say, Ryan, is that I'm so thankful for the darkest moments in my life.
Yeah.
Like, because like the one thing I'd say to your listeners, those darkest moments have been my biggest teachers. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Okay. Because they taught me so much about myself. Okay. And also they taught me ultimately how to heal my body.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, and I wouldn't be where I am today, like helping people with serious health diseases. Yeah, okay, people with serious problems, if I hadn't have experienced that myself.
Mm.
Okay, Carl Jung says you can't reach enlightenment without going through the darkness.
Mm.
Okay, so but what I would basically say to people is like, when you do go through the darkest moments, yeah, okay, it's there to teach you. It's there to enlighten you. Okay, it's not there for you to mask it and ignore it and avoid it. Okay,
mate, you bring up Jung there. Like, I have sort of a visceral attachment to Jung through some of the people I listen to, and then I quite like the concept of Stoic philosophy. I've read a bit of Ryan Holiday's sort of regurgitations on Stoic philosophy. How close do you get into the philosophical?
well, as you know, it's not necessarily my thing. I mean, I think what I'm becoming more and more known for is the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an area just I'm so passionate about. I'm so passionate about gut health. And to be honest, like, those little epithelium, like I talk about them and I'm just so fascinated by them. They're just amazing.
Yeah.
Something so microscopic can just be responsible for so many different functions that are just so pivotal to how we operate.
Yeah.
Okay. So gut for me is just such a passion. Again, I've just dived so much into that rabbit hole. Okay, that probably I haven't come out. Does that make sense? Okay, but people like Jung, and when it comes to I guess the philosophy side of things, and also even the spiritual, yeah, okay, and also I'm not taking away from obviously how big a part in terms of what's going on in our brain, okay, also plays on our physiology. Do you know what I mean? Like, like social conditioning and limiting beliefs and childhood trauma and and all, like, because the one thing that I tend to say to people is a lot of our problems started here. Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is, like, a lot of the things like those childhood trauma and the psychological traumas and so forth, but the area that bears the brunt of that, unfortunately, is the gastrointestinal lining. Okay. And so when we're, overburdening the HPA axis and we're producing more stress hormones, okay, this causes like a deterioration of the gut lining. So it compromises our microbiome, it compromises the epithelium, okay? And you just got to remember, when it comes to antigen or antibody response or immune response, one of the biggest areas that immune response is actually taking place in is the epithelium. Because if I picked up a biology book, they may give me the example of an immune response of me cutting my arm. And that creates an immune response. I'm not taking away from that, Ryan, okay? But let's ask ourselves a serious question here. How often are you cutting your arm? Not very often. Okay. How often are you breathing in particles? Often. And they hit the epithelium and that creates an immune response. Okay. How often are you eating food? Often. Okay. That creates an immune response. Does that make sense? It's not a free for all. Like, it's not like little molecules come in and the gut lining just goes, oh, you just do whatever you want. Okay. Like, it's just got to go, what's that? Yeah. Okay. It's got to go, what's that? Yeah, we can use that. Okay, what's this? Oh, I haven't seen that before. Okay, we've got to do something about that. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and there's a high amount of, white blood cells that are actually produced within the gastrointestinal lining. There could be anywhere from like 10 to 20% of your circulating white blood cells, okay, coming from the gastrointestinal lining. It's huge. Okay. So there's, and maybe because of the deterioration of the gut lining, that scenario and the pressure that we're putting on that could potentially be getting worse. Does that make sense? Okay. And so when that gut lining deteriorates, okay, because when you look at things like neurotransmitters and hormones, once again, they don't just appear in your brain. Okay. It's, once again, it's not like magic. It's not like a magic show. Yeah. Okay. And these things just appear in your brain. It comes from the relationship of neurotransmitters, hormones. Okay. These compounds come from food. Okay. And then obviously the quality of the food that we're putting in our body, that interacts with the epithelium. Okay. And that interaction allows the epithelium to assimilate the singular molecules that we require for the building blocks for these particular compounds. And that I'm not saying it's the most important relationship, but from a starting point, it's a key fundamental relationship. Okay. So then the way to look at it is that your brain is heavily dependent, okay, on that assimilation process, so that it is getting the building blocks that it requires for neurotransmitters and brain chemicals and so forth. Okay. And so that feeds back to the brain. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if that function is deteriorating, then it affects the brain. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that's going to start to show up with anxiety and depression and nervousness and neurotransmitter imbalances and mood disorders and so forth. And then the further deterioration of the gut lining, okay, because that's obviously further deterioration of the gut lining, I should say, okay, and causing more deterioration of what's going on in the brain, okay. Well, that starts to overburden your HPA axis, like your stress axis, and then that puts more pressure on the gut lining. Okay, and then eventually,
I just come up with another analogy for that. It's kind of like your sort of broken windows policy in a city. You don't want the broken windows because it encourages more broken windows, and then another one would be that excessive stress. And like you said, it's hard to determine what came first, the excessive stress or the inflamed gut. But once the vagus nerve is shut down because you're so fired up and ready to go, then you've basically got the abandoned neighborhood down there, and it's just, hell's breaking loose. Windows and buildings are falling down.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of people ask me, because you go like, and obviously it's a lot more to it than what I'm going to say here. Okay. But a lot of people ask me, like, okay, what's the relationship between the gut and the brain? Okay. And obviously you've got the enteric nervous system, and then part of the enteric nervous system, the vagus nerve. Okay. This is how I'd probably wrap up the relationship between the gut and the brain. Okay. Because we do know that there's potentially more messages that are sent from the gut to the brain than the other way around.
Yep.
Okay. So the way to look at it, this is how I would summarize the relationship between the gut and the brain. Okay. Now people would say, well, what is the brain dependent on the gut for? I would say it's dependent on the gut, enabling it to assimilate with the help of the microbiome, okay, and that ecosystem, allowing it to assimilate the singular molecules that it requires for the building blocks for neurotransmitters, brain chemicals, and so forth. Okay. It's fundamentally dependent on that. And then people go, well, what is the gut dependent on the brain for? And I'd say, don't stress it out.
That's easy, man. That's simple.
Yeah.
Not easy, simple. There's lots of problems.
It sounds simple, yeah, okay,
yeah.
But that's what I would actually say fundamentally, that the gut is dependent on the brain for. Don't stress it out, yeah, okay. And the problem there is that, and someone who I really admire, and I listen to all his podcasts, and he's really big in the realms of childhood trauma, addiction, is Dr. Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
And like, I really resonate with the messaging of Dr. Gabor Mate, okay, because he basically says, like, a lot of these childhood traumas, these negative emotions, okay, and essentially how they're associated to a lot of our diseases and ailments that we're experiencing today. And like, one thing I wanted to bring up here, because the penny really dropped with me when I started to listen to a lot of Dr. Gabor Mate's podcasts, because it really resonated with a lot of the messaging that I like to send out, okay. And he basically said that the key fundamental development years for emotional health is 0 to 3.
Right.
Now, what I say is, when it comes to the gut lining, the key fundamental time frame for microbiome development is 0 to 1,000 days. That's 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. The gut lining fully starts to develop by about the age of 3. So that epithelium, that connective tissue, okay, fully starts to develop by about the age of 3. And your immune system fully starts to develop. And there's different, ideas around this, but they say that the immune system will fully develop by about maybe the age of 4 to 5. And the thing that I'd say here is that you look at fundamentally all these things, these like the microbiome, emotional health, the gut lining, the immune system, they all are around a very similar time frame. Okay. And if you take one of these out, it affects the other 3. And where it's really breaking down for a lot of people is the development of all four of those things is being affected.
Mm-hmm.
And when all four of those things are affected, this is going to be disastrous in terms of serious health ailments, serious diseases, autoimmune, all these types of things, which we're really facing at the moment. Okay. And a big thing that really, once again, resonated, and I think you used the example of multiple sclerosis. Okay. And with multiple sclerosis, it's more prevalent in females. Okay. They say maybe up to 70, 75% of, MS sufferers are females. Okay. And he actually stemmed it to, sexual abuse, because obviously sexual abuse is more prevalent in girls. Okay. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality. Okay. But basically, if you start to look at this connection, I was really fascinated with this connection. Okay. Is that if a girl from a very young age goes through the sexual abuse, it creates like a post-traumatic stress response or post-traumatic stress disorder within the young girl. And that's to be expected. Does that make sense? Okay. Because what would happen initially is she would produce high amounts of catecholamines and stress hormones. Yeah. Okay. And it gets to a point where the body has negative feedback loops to protect the body. You say too much, too many stress hormones, shut this down. And that creates this negative feedback loop to the brain to down-regulate the production of stress hormones. But in the process of down-regulating stress hormones, okay, it also down-regulates other hormones that are produced within the hypothalamus, the pituitary. So it affects things like the HPT axis. So it affects the thyroid. So it affects the thermostat, thermogenesis, okay, your metabolism. Okay. And the way to explain this is that if you're down-regulating stress hormones and even things like cortisol, okay, well, cortisol actually helps to stimulate your lymphatic organs. So it actually helps with white blood cells. So you get a suppression of the immune system. So when you get the suppression of the immune system, and the role of things like obviously your white blood cells, and particular ones like neutrophils, is to keep in check things like candida, yeast, negative gram bacteria. You understand, like you washing your hands doesn't mean you're not going to have bad bacteria in your body. Just to understand, like everyone needs to understand that bad bacteria is part of a normal ecology. It's there whether you like it or not. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. But once again, it's the ratio that's the most important. Okay. But if we start to affect the ecosystem, we start to affect the ratio, and all of a sudden you start to get a high proliferation of the opportunistic bacteria in that instance. Okay. The opportunistic bacteria start releasing the byproducts. We may get more hyperpermeability, so more deterioration of the gut lining. So then, bacterial byproducts. One example is LPS, lipopolysaccharides, has a quicker escape route through the intracellular tight junctions, and it hits the hepatic port cell system. For your listeners, that's liver, bloodstream. Okay. And it might ramp up liver enzymes, and for a certain period of time, your body can deal with that. But then it gets to a point where it just can't keep up with the capacity to clear it. And then now there's more LPS floating around your bloodstream. Okay. And the problem is LPS can damage the blood-brain barrier, outside of the blood-brain barrier. Okay. And just to understand, certain molecules can now permeate up through the blood-brain barrier. Okay. Where essentially they start to cause neuroinflammation. So inflammation in the brain. Okay. And also a lot of these things like LPS can cause things like abscesses. Okay. And also they'll cause things like lesions. Okay. And that's like plaquing in the brain. And essentially that's multiple sclerosis. Okay. Hence why multiple sclerosis can be linked to certain types of negative gram-bacteria overgrowth. But what I find really interesting here, you had the trigger, which was the stress response, and the overproduction of stress hormones and so forth, that ruined the environment. And then it ruined the environment, and it created the bacterial overgrowth. And then the byproducts from the bacteria, when they had an easier escape route through the gut lining, and then the body couldn't keep up with the clearance, and then there was more LPS, and then that started, because once you lose the gut lining, the big thing to say with the gut lining is the gut lining is a very protective barrier for your brain. And once you lose, so yes, you've got the blood-brain barrier, but it's just more vulnerable. It's not structurally as robust as the epithelium within the gastrointestinal lining. Okay. And so now that is more vulnerable. When that deteriorates, this is more vulnerable. Okay. And then all of a sudden, okay, once again, these, byproducts and so forth passing through the blood-brain barrier, and then they cause the complications within the brain. But you understand, Ryan, what we look at is we look at the end result, because now that's where the symptoms are displaying, and then we treat the end result, and we don't actually treat where the problems actually started from, including the emotional trauma and the childhood trauma and the emotional state, and also including the gastrointestinal lining and the microbiome imbalances. So we just go straight to the end area. We go straight to the end area to treat that. But once again, we're using, it's a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
Okay. And once again, I'm not taking away from that to mitigate the symptoms, make the person feel better. But once again, to fix the problem, you're going to have to go and fix where the problem started from. Once again, that emotional trauma and that childhood trauma, but also the deterioration of the most protective physical barrier in the human body.
Mm-hmm. Mate, I don't know. Like myself, I've done 2 degrees. I've worked now for 8 or so years, meanwhile, looking at various articles that come across, sort of follow 2 sides of the carbohydrate argument, insulin argument, cholesterol argument on Twitter, and try to read either sides of the story. Luckily, having a science base, I can sort of understand what they're talking about in the papers. And you yourself have, like you said, gone deep into the rabbit hole of this, at a cellular, at a biochemical level of what's going on, and then working out from that. And it speaks to this sort of first principles approach to health and life, and downstream effects, and big picture, small picture, what's going on, what are the sort of levers that I can pull for the general population. What sort of things, how often should they be looking at and for in their blood work? Like one of the things Nigel Beach has sort of said that, something as simple as CRP, you spoke about, what's normal, inverted commas, and that's above 3, but really you should be down 1, 6. If you're 6, that's too high, and then again with CRP, make sure you haven't had a cold. make sure you haven't had a stressful week. Make sure you haven't done a gigantic workout, and go into those tests fasted and see your results. Like how do you feel about blood work? You brought it up at the start.
Well, obviously it's my big thing. Yeah, like blood work, I would say, because I've actually created a blood software, which I'm really excited about. It's got my correlations in there. Mm-hmm. You actually put in the information, and it actually spits out the real problems. Because what people need to understand, Ryan, is that a lot of the way that people are looking at blood markers is they're looking at the individual markers and they're trying to treat the markers. So even if I look at CRP, and so for me, I like people to be under 1, exactly like you said. Yeah, okay. It's a sensitive marker. Yeah. That's the problem. So if I look at CRP in isolation, it's not going to tell me much. Does that make sense? Okay. Because, the person might have had an acute injury, like some sort of trauma to a tendon or ligament or something like that. That can elevate the CRP. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. The most important information is the trends and the correlations, not me looking at an individual marker. Let me give you an example here. Okay. So if I look at something like hemoglobin, okay. So most of the time, because once again, they're looking at it and go, well, that is low. What can we do to boost this up? Or this is high. What can we do to bring that down? I'm not there to treat individual markers. I'm there to treat the problem. I'm there to identify.
It just makes too much sense, Dave.
Okay, and that's the thing. Like, but what we end up doing is treating individual markers.
Yeah.
Okay, and so if you look at something like hemoglobin, okay, and obviously this is to do with your red blood cells. Yeah. Okay, and so one component that makes up your hemoglobin is iron. Yeah. Okay, and then a common scenario that takes place when looking at the hemoglobin, even sometimes not even looking at the iron, or looking at the iron and seeing that the iron is normal. Yeah, okay, is that they look at that the hemoglobin is low and saying, well, what a key component that makes up the hemoglobin is iron. So here, take iron. Now, iron. So just for listeners to understand that iron is highly toxic in the body. Okay, hence why you've got ferritin, because it's a carrier molecule for iron and it helps to store iron. Okay, so essentially, because once again, it just doesn't want high amounts of iron within the bloodstream. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Because it's toxic. Yeah, okay. So the thing to understand is, in that instance, if we take iron infusions, yeah, okay, iron supplements, okay, especially if you've got like negative gram-bacteria issues, okay, and then that negative gram-bacteria and potentially things like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then these bacteria have colonized together and then they've created a biofilm, and that's like a sticky mucilage, like a protective membrane that's made up of like DNA and proteins and fluids and ions, but heavy metals like mercury, cadmium, iron. Okay, these types of heavy metals. Okay, that basically, and iron. Okay, so it uses iron. Okay, and so the thing is, it prefers to help with the biofilm. Okay, it prefers iron supplements and iron infusions. So if you look at it and just go, well, you've got low hemoglobin, here, take iron, and then they've got negative gram-bacteria overgrowth, and they've got biofilm issues, then you've essentially just made that problem worse. Because if someone just had low iron and then you give them iron, essentially they're going to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, they have the iron supplements, they have the iron infusions, they feel worse. Okay. And so this is the problem here, Ryan. Okay. Because if I look at hemoglobin and I look at all the components that make up hemoglobin, yes, ions, not taking away from that. But you also need B6, that's pyridoxine. Okay. You also need B12, that's cobalamin. Okay. You also need B9, that's folate. Okay. You also need vitamin A because that helps with your stem cells. Okay. You also need copper because that helps with the absorption of iron into the gastrointestinal line. Okay. You also need glycine. That's the building block for heme. That's an amino acid. Okay. You also, to metabolize the glycine, you need Escherichia coli. That's E. coli. Okay. To help you synthesize the B9, you need Streptococcus thermophilus. There's 9 things that I need to actually have good hemoglobin. And we just looked at one.
Yeah, mate, it's bringing a couple of thoughts to mind. A guy I've had on here, Ivor Cummins, a sort of a chemical process medical engineering person. And then today I was listening to a bloke, 2 engineers actually having a discussion. Lex Friedman was talking to this guy that's worked on the little antibody quick screening for COVID. And that's what he was basically saying is that they need to start public health engineering because we need to start looking at a full systems, full data approach to medicine, not like you say, one marker, one thing. Let's look at things as a systems approach. And that was the same for Ivo. He spoke about he had some liver markers that were high and everything else was, inverted commas, good. And he said to his GP, what does that mean? And he said, don't know. And so he had to put his engineering hat on, read a bunch of papers. Again, another person that's lucky enough to understand how to read a paper and how to select data, understand the statistics, and then price things away and realize that he was at a great risk for a heart attack, a typical 50-year-old engineer guy going, shit, I could have fallen over. But, he's managed to now dive into that well. But it takes a full systems engineering approach.
Yeah. And so for the listeners to understand is that when I look at blood markers, I'm looking at the relationship of one blood marker to another. Mm-hmm. Then also I actually want your past blood markers. The problem is that we're looking at everything in moment in time. We're not looking at what was happening to you 5 years ago. I want that information. I need that information, okay? Because it's telling me the trends. It's telling me where the problem started from, and that might have been the acute phase of the problem, and now it's become chronic. Does it make sense? Because what people need to understand with blood markers, if I just look at a moment in time, there's many different scenarios behind that. Okay. And also what people need to understand is that healthy bloods generally ebb and flow. And people might go like sitting back and just thinking about that and go, isn't that erratic? And I go, yeah, it's normal. They'll be up and they'll be down and they'll be just, once again, it's just like, that's the normal function of the human body. Okay. And what is not normal for me to see in bloods is for something to be low all the time. Now, what would be the chance that every time you've had your bloods checked over 5 years, that something is always sitting low? That's something chronic. That's something that's not going away. So whatever you're doing in your life, okay, that's not going away. And what would generally not go away? Bacteria, gut lining issues, Okay. Unless you fix it, it's not going away. That's one thing I can promise you. Like retroviruses and viruses, yeah, okay, these things eventually they go away. Okay, bacterial complications, gut lining damage, unless you fixed it, it's not going anywhere. Okay, and so that's a lot of the trends that when I'm looking at people's blood markers, I'm going, well, isn't this interesting? Yeah, okay, like things like the MEBs, the monocytes and the eosinophils and the basophils, there's a total amount of that. Okay? And they're like, you'd almost classify them like pro-inflammatory white blood cells. And when they're constantly high, okay, you know, like sitting in the, like I've obviously got my optimal levels, but they're sitting high all the time, yeah, okay, that's actually a sign of hyperpermeability taking place in the gut line. So if they're regularly high like that, then I'm going, okay, hyperpermeability is taking place. I use obviously other blood markers as well to support that. And then I will basically back it up with how they're feeling. Because most of the time, how I look at it is I look at the blood markers first. Okay. I already have an understanding of how they're feeling. And then basically I go, well, this is the problem. This is how you'd feel. And they just go, yep, yes. How do you know? Okay. Like they just like, you can see them just looking at me, just going, oh my God, how does he know that this is how I'm feeling? Because it's I've identified the problem. Does that make sense? I'm not identifying symptoms. I've identified the problem. And then the problem, that's the symptoms that you have with that problem.
Yeah, you're not reading minds. You're reading information and data and trends.
Yeah. And so like what I'm picking up in people's blood markers, okay, I will pick up, you know, certain markers that are a reflection of negative gram-bacteria. So you've got really elevated fasting insulin. Okay. If you've got really, you know, inconsistencies with your white blood cells being really high, but also really low. Your GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase, is the liver enzyme. Now, unfortunately, in the medical realms, they just use it as a fatty liver indicator, caffeine sensitive. Okay. They'll go, okay, so we'll just say, oh, you know, some sort of complication with fatty liver. And I go, well, you know, GGT, it's like that liver enzyme, gamma glutamyl transferase, it's the glutamyl cycle, but it's a reflection of the glutathione cycle, the master antioxidant. So it's your ability to synthesize, it's really telling me your ability to synthesize glutathione, which is one of the best reflections of longevity, if you're asking me. Okay.
So it's most important for cataracts. That's what drops down as a cataract forms. It's glutathione.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about your mitochondria and your cells, yeah, okay, like glutathione, yeah, okay. Your ability to recycle other antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E, glutathione, yeah, okay. Your ability to, you know, it plays a role in phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification, yeah, okay. Your ability to clear plastics and heavy metals and bacterial byproducts, glutathione. And you actually look at it, like, as I said, glutathione is one of the best reflections of longevity, okay. And like you look at someone's like GGT levels. Now, what I'm looking at it to understand what someone's glutathione pools are doing. Not telling me some sort of symptom of fatty liver or something like that. Okay. It's telling me where their glutathione pools are sitting. So if the GGT is always sitting low, it's telling me that they have a poor capacity to synthesize decent amounts of glutathione from the liver. And what I'm assessing is what's causing that. Okay. Well, bacterial byproducts like LPS catabolizes your glutathione pools. Okay. So if I'm looking at it and the fasting insulin is really high, the GGT is really low, okay, they have these inconsistencies with their white blood cells. So you understand that then it's the correlations, okay? And I don't want people to just like these correlations I've created. I don't want people just like go applying these willy-nilly because it doesn't necessarily mean you understand the correlations. Does that make sense? Okay. So, but I take these correlations and then I go, well, that's actually a reflection of negative gram-bacteria. Okay. And so I actually know what the bacterial issues are that they're dealing with. Now, if I want to, then obviously I can just do stool testing to confirm that they have the negative gram-bacteria overgrowth. Okay. And so now I know essentially what they're going to be experiencing, because a lot of people with the negative gram-bacteria overgrowth and the excessive amounts of LPS, they tend to have like blunting of the brush borders. Okay. They're going to have issues with pancreatic beta cells. So they're having inconsistencies with insulin. So blood sugar management dysregulation. There's more pro-inflammatory proteins. So they tend to have more inflammation, especially where they've got articular cartilage. Okay. So like puffy fingers, sore fingers. Okay. Another area where you've got high articular cartilage, like the neck. So the neck tends to be tight all the time. They're stretching it all the time. Okay. It doesn't matter how much they release their upper traps. They're always tight in the neck. Okay. They tend to, also have, almost like sinusitis type scenarios, blocked ears, okay? Dull pain behind their eyes, okay? Tend to get like blocked nose, okay? They tend to be congested a lot of the time, okay? And they get like brain fog, okay? Like this dull feeling, this light feeling in the head, okay? And then you can also be more prone to autoimmune conditions, urinary tract infections, pneumonia, meningitis, okay? So once again, it's just like, it allows me to identify, and then they obviously having issues with the fruit oligosaccharides, potentially the starches, okay? So it like, if I look at the bloods and I look at it in the correlations, Ryan, then I can identify the actual real problem.
It's too easy.
But not if I look at it in individual, like if I just look at individual markers and just start addressing things based on the individual markers. Because the thing that I would say, Ryan, is that once again, the hemoglobin is not the issue. The hemoglobin is a symptom of the issue. And if I just address the hemoglobin, I'm addressing the symptom.
So I think as a patient, then I don't know what the advice is. How do you ask more whys is this just medicine is broken? I get a little bit disheartened on this topic.
I don't want to people to get pessimistic when they listen to me, because I'm very optimistic.
Good. Give us some optimism.
About the future. Because if we start, it's not to say that understanding the individual markers and like specialization is required.
I agree.
That makes sense. And I feel like we've gone through a period of specialization, and maybe for a reason. Does that make sense? Okay. But the body does not work in compartments.
No.
And that's the problem. Because if I always look at the head and I'm just looking at the issues in the head, and I've only got someone who's looking at the issues in the head, then I'm missing the gut. And likewise, if I'm only looking at what's going on in the gut and not looking at what is going on in other areas of the body, then I'm missing potentially the head. Or I'm missing some other area in the body. Does that make sense? Okay. And I think all our years in going through this specialization is really setting us up to become more generalists. Okay.
I'm going to add some optimism to that as well. In sort of, it's this next tier. You're right. It's this next tier coming through. For example, as I said with my her new GP going down this broader road. We've got just had a new dermatologist come to the country who's explored his genetics. He understands, he's got a family history of keratoconus. He's got a family history of type 2 diabetes. He understands that the skin being an organ is reflective of, as a manifestation of the body. We've got an ophthalmologist now who's a maxillofacial specialist, but also a glaucoma specialist. She understands that glaucoma is a problem with metabolism. Does this person have sleep apnea? What else is going on? We're starting to see these conversations happen in medicine and health of why not, you've got glaucoma, let's lower your eye pressure. You've got dermatitis, here's a steroid cream.
And even in the aspect, and I'm not like, I don't want people to get me wrong here. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, essentially, this is just about us getting better.
Yes.
It's just growth. This is all I'm talking about here. Like, the worst thing you can do is just stay stagnant and say, oh, we've got the formula, because we know we don't have the formula.
Yeah.
Okay. This is just about growth. This is all I'm talking about. So, in the example of something like nutrition, how can someone learn nutrition? I'm not taking away from people who've learnt nutrition. I'm not having a go here. Okay. But how can I learn nutrition and not understand gut health?
Yeah.
You have to learn about gut health. You have to learn about gut health. You have to understand microbiome back to front. You have to understand the epithelium, because the problem is then you're applying a technique that is based on perfect scenario. And perfect scenario does not, we're dealing with human beings here. And that does not exist for many people. Okay. And so if you don't understand the particular microbiome makeup and how that's affecting someone's ability to metabolize normally completely healthy compounds and so forth, okay, there's no way. It's like the analogy I would give, it's literally like pin the tail on the donkey. And like, I just think that the paradigm is there to be changed.
Yeah. And it is. And so that's where we get excited.
Yes. That's where I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think the new paradigm needs to be, you want to learn about nutrition, you got to learn about the gut.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's only one example. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, you don't want to learn about the gut? Well, maybe don't learn about nutrition. I don't know, that might wind people up, but I'm just saying it's also there for people who've learned about nutrition. It's there for growth for them. That's exciting.
You have got me excited as well to read some papers. Mate, I'm sure people are gonna want to come find you. Where do people find you now? Still Dave O'Brien, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm still Dave O'Brien. Look, obviously, I've stepped away from Fifth Element. Not an easy, definitely not an easy decision. It's not something I ever wanted to do. Because the one thing I say with Fifth Element is like part of my soul.
Mm.
It's an expression of myself. But also the thing that I love so much about Fifth Element is that it just encapsulates like all that aspect of not believing in a monotherapy, and that you use all these different modalities and ideologies to really help the healing process. Yeah. And it's something that I never really wanted to step away from. And, you know, look, if I'm honest, I'm always honest. If I'm really honest, it actually came down to, there was huge financial pressure for myself and my family. And really, I was trying to think of really how I get the message out to more people.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like I needed to change the vessel. And I would never take away from the close to 7.5 years of Fifth Element, because like Fifth Element, apart from all the amazing people that walk through the door and all the amazing people that I just feel so blessed that have come into my life, as a consequence of setting up that place that just had this most amazing energy. I'm extremely grateful for every single encounter that I had as a result of Fifth Element, because it's made me a better person, you know. And the one thing also that I would say that I'm extremely grateful for from a growth aspect for me is Fifth Element was like a lab to me. I was like a mad scientist, okay, locked away in my office. And that just enabled me to have the space, not always the time, okay, but had the space to really start to utilize these tools, like looking at blood markers, like looking at what's going on with the gut, okay, and to explore. It was a time for exploration and really coming up with systems and structures that really changed people's lives for the better. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was the vessel for a long period of time. And, you know, if I'm, there's one thing I've always been prepared to do. If I feel like the vessel needs to be changed to enable that to get out to more people and to help more people, then I'm willing to change that vessel. And that's really, I guess, the leap of faith that I've taken is and it didn't come easy. It definitely didn't come easy, but I know like all the people that I love so much from that place, the members, the staff, I know ultimately they'll just come straight back into my life. That's why ultimately I'm not scared. I'm more scared about not getting this stuff out to people. I'm more scared about that. So I've changed the vessel. Yeah. And yes, I've had to let go of a huge part of that. But I'm also excited about that. And, yes, at the moment, it's coming under the Dave O'Brien brand. But just so people understand, is the ideology is still there. Like nothing has changed. Only the physical vessel.
Wicked.
The intention and my love of helping people, that will never change. It'll just only get stronger, to be honest.
That's really cool, man. And I saw you got to be a part of a new vessel the other week. Finally, Mr. Mark Kluwer's venture, his dream coming true. What was it like to see that, man? You've had a big influence on that man's life, and wow, what a spot! Elevated planes.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I want to make clear is, like, look, I feel really honoured that people would say, how much of an influence that I've had in helping them with their own health journey and so forth. But I always say, Ryan, that I've got as much out of those interactions as they've got from me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, and the one thing with Mark is that, like, for us, the Kluwers, okay, so Jules and Mark and, Mahalia and Lauren, okay, the Kluwers to us, they're like family.
Yeah.
Okay, like, and we feel so blessed and I'm so honoured that I can actually bring up 2 young children, get to spend time with such amazing people. And with Mark, he's such a contagious energy. You can't help but want to be around Mark. You know what I mean? And he just makes you a better person.
Yeah.
Like, and he's made me a better person. He might say the good things that I've done for him, but trust me, he's made me a way better person for being around him. And so, like, I just can't wait for people to see what he's created at Elevated Springs, because it is, like, truly amazing. And it's just like, one of those things, and I would have said the same thing about Fifth Element for a period of time, is like, photos never do things justice.
Yeah.
And I always found that with Fifth, like, I look at the photos and go, it doesn't look as good as when you're actually sitting here. Yeah. And when you're there, you just go, oh my God, the energy here and everything is just so special. And it's the same thing with what Mark's created at Elevated Springs. So whatever you're looking at in the photos, trust me, when you're there in person, it's 20 times better. Yeah. So whatever I tell you now, Ryan, is really not going to do it justice. And so really it's for anyone who wants to experience a retreat with really all the elements that really retreats should have. Okay. Not like lemon detox cleansers and, these types of things. Yeah. Okay. We've got to get away from this traditional form of, like, health retreats and so forth. You want to experience, like, ice baths and sweat lodges and, great community and working the land and, being in nature. I mean, I think this is just going to be the new paradigm of retreats. And, I'm so honored to, whatever help Mark needs from me, like, I'm always going to be the first one to put my hand up.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's Mark and I have a shared passion for that, that's for sure. So, Dave, what would you say you've learned this year? What a year. What's been the sort of North Star to keeping on moving, man? Keeping on, being there with your family, putting out content, focusing on that integrity and what's core to you, what's kept it going.
Look, I'm not going to lie, Ryan. Okay, like 2020 for us as a family has been incredibly hard. Like, it's been incredibly hard. I know everyone's got their own stories. We made the decision to look after Bianca's terminally ill dad. And so he passed away with us. That was incredibly hard, and the respect that I've gained for Bianca has just watching that, her look after a small child. She was pregnant, to look after a terminally ill father. It just pales in comparison to anything that I've had to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just a reality. Yeah. So as traumatic as that has been, Ryan, we also feel incredibly blessed that he got to pass away here with us. You know, the thing that I've said before, Ryan, I've said to people, we sort of come into the world and there's an element of trauma there. Yeah, okay. It's painful. Yeah. There's a bit of blood. Yeah. Okay. But ultimately you're surrounded by the people that care about you the most. And the one thing that we feel really blessed with Vic is that he got to leave this world being surrounded by the people that really loved him the most. Like what? So people might look at it and say, this is really traumatic, but trust me, we sit back and we think how blessed we are for him to have gone out that way. Yeah. And so this is the one thing I'll say, and to leave a business that has been such a huge part of my soul and an expression of myself, and that it's just the memories, okay, and the people that have walked through the doors, people like Josh Coleman, Mark Clure, just ultimately it just attracted such amazing people. To let go of that, I remember my exit speech, and I had a lot of things that I wanted to say, and all I did was cry for an hour. That's all I did. I just cried for an hour, and that tells you how much that place meant to me. And a lot of people said, I felt so embarrassed that I couldn't even say anything about 7.5 years of my life there. And people said, you didn't need to say anything. Yeah. Now I can look at that and say, this is traumatic and this is terrible. Or I can look at it and just go, how blessed am I to have experienced that, and to have had a lab that's enabled me to create tools that I really think can better people. And that's, once again, that you know what I said to you almost right at the start, where I said a lot of people look at the darkness, yeah, okay, and they look at it as an inconvenience. They look at it as like, how do I escape it? And for me, I embrace it. Yeah, because it's just like, once again, I'll look at 2020 and I can say it's been painful, yeah, and it's been hard, okay, but ultimately it's made me better.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, man. Thank you so much for your time, Dave. It's been so good to do this again, and we'll have to do it a bit more frequently, and hopefully we can get some of this travel stuff sorted, and I can finally get to Melbourne again and connect with so many amazing people that I've met there, and give you a hug and go to places like Elevated Springs, and just can't wait. Can't wait to get over there and visit.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love that, mate. I mean, I think the one thing, and I'm sure you're the same, is that this is great, and this is great that we can do this over Zoom and so forth. But human connection, and nothing beats it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like nothing beats it. And how healing it is on the body, and is second to none. Yeah, so I look forward to that embrace, mate.
Brilliant. I'll press stop, and yeah, thank you.